Well, hello, folks. Of course, it's naturally enough in the Southern Hemisphere on the Australian East Coast, it's 7 p.m. Naturally, our co-host, if you've been watching the shows, is in the Northern Hemisphere, and currently daylight saving in the UK is 10 o'clock in the morning. However, our guest is in another part of the world, and I'll share that experience by letting Andrena tell us what's going on.
Hi. Good morning and welcome everybody to Dreaming the New Dream. Any new listeners, welcome, and especially to any old ones. Today is the 21st of September, and here in the UK we are on the eve of the equinox, so magical times. And I spoke to Andy a while ago and I thought, well, he's well into magic and all sorts of amazing things. So how about he came on the magic of the equinox? So Andy, welcome, and it's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Right, so I met Andy back earlier in the year in Glastonbury, because Andy was formerly living in Glastonbury, and then I had the pleasure of going to Cyprus with a friend for a beautiful sunny blue sky holiday, and I don't think I just saw a couple of clouds in that 10-12 day period. It was just, and then you come back and well, today we got a glimpse of the sun anyway. So it was lovely to connect with you in Cyprus, and hopefully I should be able to do it again another day. But without further ado, you've got so many gifts and talents, and you've studied in so many different things. So you've got so many strings to your bow. So I would like you to start where you landed on planet Earth and all the steps that have taken you to the amazing journey. So I've got lots of different questions to ask. So I'll be butting in here and there, but please share your wonderful story.
Wow, that's an interesting question. So, to frame that, I currently run, amongst other things, an online magical school called Helios. And Helios teaches the Western mystery tradition, so Hermetic magic and alchemy, combined with, or blended with, modern psychological approaches such as neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. So, where I'm at right now is that I run a magical school online that teaches Hermetic magic and personal development and spiritual development. And in my part-time, if you like, and in my day job, I'm head of learning for a new startup business that is going to be doing personal development, spiritual development, and all kinds of really cool things as a big business starting in March next year. So I am at a place right now where I have been teaching alchemy, Hermetic magic, and spiritual development for the last 10 to 12 years. And the question you're asking me, I guess, really is, how did I get there? Or how did I get here? That's a long story. I am, as I kind of alluded to earlier, a trainer by training, by profession. And I'm an engineer. I have a degree in engineering many, many years ago. And I ended up migrating from engineering to being a trainer. And in the early 1990s, I remember asking a very good friend of mine, what is it? What is that one thing that makes the difference between a good trainer and a really good, inspiring trainer? What's the difference that makes the difference? How do I get to be a really good trainer? And he said to me, you need to go and learn NLP. And I said, what on earth is that? And he said, neuro-linguistic programming. And I said, and that doesn't mean anything to me either. Mm-hmm. So I went and researched it, and I went and did a practitioner certification in neuro-linguistic programming, which is a branch of psychology in a way, and it covers how we communicate with each other and how we perceive the world, how we process the world, and it has a huge number of really effective and powerful healing modalities within it for basically dealing with our stuff, for want of a better description. And I actually came off that training course after a year feeling quite confused and not really feeling like I grasped everything that I should have done. And that same friend of mine said to me a couple of weeks later, I'm going to Hawaii next March to learn and do my master practitioner in neurolinguistic programming with Dr. Tad James. Would you like to come? And so, long story short, I did. And that completely changed my life, changed everything. First of all, I was training with an amazing teacher who was an exquisite teacher of neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis. And secondly, Tad James, who's sadly dead now, was also teaching Huna, the Hawaiian spiritual system in Hawaii. So I ended up learning Huna, as well as learning NLP, neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis, and training over a period of years with some really amazing people. And I came back to the UK in the late 1990s, still doing my day job as a trainer, running my own training business at that point, and thinking, well, I'm pretty good at Hawaiian Huna stuff. I'm pretty good at the NLP stuff, but what about the spiritual traditions of my own islands? And that led me on a quest to research and look for what would the ancient spiritual tradition of Britain, of Europe, of the place I come from, rather than Hawaii, which I love, and it's an amazing place if you've ever been. But it isn't my part of the world. So that led me to learn the Western mystery tradition, alchemy and hermetic magic and Qabalah, with an amazing lady who is now in her mid-90s called Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki. And Dolores, at the time, was the head of a magical school called the Servants of the Light. So I trained with Dolores from the mid to late 1990s for a period of about 10, 15 years. I got to know Dolores very well, and we ended up co-presenting, co-developing, co-writing a series of big magical workshops. And it was Dolores who pretty much taught me most of what I know about magic and hermetic magic and Qabalah. And in 2012, I said to Dolores, look, my time with the Servants of the Light is kind of done. I've got what I need to get from working with you, and I still want to be part of this, but it's time for me to go set up my own school. And she said, yes, I think that's a good idea, and I think you should go and do that with our blessing. And so I took a different approach. And one of the things that I have seen over the years with people who study some of the spiritual development techniques and processes and traditions,
Have we lost Andy, have we?
I was thinking, don't let it be me, but yeah, it went a bit funny then.
Yeah. So I think it's frozen. Well, just carry on with the fact that Andy's based in Cyprus, and here we go. He's back.
You're back.
Can you hear me? I can hear you all the time. I'm like, oh.
Well, we couldn't hear you. You sort of come and gone, and I think you've gone again, or it looks like it. You've frozen. So
there you go. Okay, no. He's coming from Dubai, so
yeah, Andy, you're breaking up for some reason, and then you're freezing. So
Is that
okay? And then Andrew's saying all three of us are frozen. So obviously the Wi-Fi, I can see and hear you, Andrena, live as well.
Oh, well,
okay, so yeah.
We just maybe wait for Andy. I don't know whether, Andy, you can do anything to reset or come back on.
Yeah.
Right, he's dropped out. Right, because Andy has studied in a lot of things that I've got little knowledge in. So, but I know he's just completed a workshop, an invocation workshop in Glastonbury last weekend, and I think he flew back Sunday night or Monday morning to do straight to Dubai. So he's quite a traveller. So, right. Yeah. So Andy's got a PhD. What else can I tell you? But I was interested. Hello.
Can you hear me again?
Yes, excellent.
Thank goodness.
Go on, carry on. I'm not quite sure where you were with that last sentence.
So to finish, I worked with Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki, and we essentially I left the Servants of the Light with her blessing and set up my own school. And that school, Helios, which you've just shown the website for, has a different approach to teaching hermetic magic and alchemy and all the spiritual stuff. In the sense that one of the things, as I was just saying before we got rudely cut off, was that people who focus a lot on spiritual development and not on the commensurate development of mental and physical stuff, clearing their unresolved negative emotions, letting go of self-limiting beliefs, focusing on developing their mental skills as well, tends to find that they think they're really spiritual, but actually their lives are falling apart. Now, I know that's a big generalization, but you come across a lot of people who think they're very spiritual, but they haven't got a job, they can't hold a good relationship together, all kinds of things aren't working in their life. And to me, that's not magic. That's someone who thinks they're really spiritual, but their life is falling apart. Glastonbury is full of those people, by the way. And much as I love Glastonbury to bits, it's full of those people. And so I wanted to look at it, and also that was my experience in learning magic myself, that many people who were close friends of mine had that kind of experience. I didn't. I had my own challenges, many of them. But I began to understand that was because learning the neuro-linguistic programming piece, learning emotional development and mental development, learning how to let go of your stuff, clearing all your fears, clearing all your unresolved negative emotions, letting go of self-limiting beliefs, was a key part of proper, coherent, magical development, spiritual development. It's what the ancient Egyptians used to do in their training of priests and priestesses, and it's what people like Dion Fortune and Israel Agadi in the Western mystery tradition in the 20th century said psychotherapy was a really important part of the developmental process. So I wanted to create a magical school that integrated the emotional development, the mental development, and the spiritual development in a coherent model that that really addressed all those different parts of a person and enabled them to become a more whole person, if you like, more spiritually developed in all the different areas. And I heard you alluding to, when I got cut off, me having a PhD in Esoteric studies. Not something I advertise very much because it really sounds a bit pretentious, but the reason for doing that and my research was into using
We're losing you again, Andy.
Right. Okay, so let's just have a look when he comes back on. So we know he lives in Cyprus.
Yes, in Paphos, and it's absolutely
so the epicenter is calling is Egyptian as well as Greek mythology, and then he's got the Qabalah, which obviously is a Jewish mystic path as well. So it was leading on to explain that he's formed a mystery school in 2012. So Here he comes back again. Let's see if there's...
It's going to be one of those mornings, I think.
I can only apologise because I've got a 5-bar signal here, but it could well be network connections in Dubai, for which I apologise.
It's just one of those things.
So as I say, so I utilise the neuro-linguistic programming behavioural modelling techniques to take some very well-known practitioners of the magical arts, model their behaviour, distill that, understand how they did what they did inside the head, if you like, and then build a training course that replicated those behaviours, attitudes and values to be able to really efficiently and effectively train people in the Western mysteries in, as Jeffrey was just about to touch on, Egyptian magic as well as Hermetic and Kabbalistic magic. So that was my PhD research 20 years ago now. It's 2004 I finished that. But that's the core of the basis of the content that we created for Helios, the magical school that we now run. So I guess in a nutshell, that's how I got here.
So where does Egyptology come in, and like how many, because I think you've been to Egypt a few times. I can't remember when we spoke a long time ago. So I'd like to know a little bit more about what drew you to Egypt. Was it through all your different studies?
For anybody who's fascinated by ancient Egypt and who goes there, I can only describe it as an emotional connection, and I think it's a past life connection. So I went to Egypt for the first time actually a long time ago, in 1996, and I'd been fascinated by the ancient gods and the temples and the pyramids and all that stuff. But it wasn't until I really got my head into the Western mystery tradition that I started to see Egypt not just from the fascination of a historic, amazing, ancient, beautiful civilization, but from the fact that it was an amazing civilization that lasted longer than any other civilization we're certainly aware of, bar perhaps Atlantis if you go down that road. And it lasted for 3,500 years or more as a magical theocracy. And it's like, wow, that's interesting. They had a massively high development of art and culture. They had a very high level of spiritual development. They had a very good technology for their time. And it was based on a magical theocracy. That's interesting. So I was fascinated by Egypt. And then I ended up doing some magical workshops with Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki, during which we had some pretty amazing experiences. Experiences that were, I can only describe as literally being in the presence of the gods. And if you have those kind of experiences where you in the NLP world, we would say we have an undeniable experience, right? It's not that you believe that something's there, it's that you know it is to the core of your being. And when I realized that we created that, in the sense that we created the conditions within an environment, magical ritual or whatever, to invoke those beings and have them there and to experience their presence. That's pretty amazing. And once I realized that that wasn't play acting and it wasn't amateur dramatics, and that there was something going on that was more than normal people would say would happen, I'm like, okay, there's something here. There's something big here. And for me, the reason why I'm so attracted to Egyptian magic, and to a lesser extent the Greek stuff, it's not really my bag, the Greek stuff, even though I live in Cyprus, is that it's different from Kabbalistic and Hermetic magic. Kabbalistic and Hermetic magic is quite mental in the way it works, and it's dealing with archangels and angels and all that good stuff. When you deal with gods and goddesses, it's a different deal completely. This is something a lot of people don't understand. They just don't get it. It is very different. They're all beings. They're all people that exist, beings that exist on the non-physical realms of creation. But gods and goddesses are very different to archangels and angelic beings. They're on different evolutionary paths. Long story, but they are. So when you work with the gods and goddesses in that way, and you really start to develop a personal connection with them, amazing things happen. And that happened to me, and it happens to many of my friends, colleagues, and people I've taught or worked with. And that's a personal connection. And the other interesting thing about teaching magic versus the Egyptian stuff is many people perceive quote unquote magic as a means to an end. How do I use this to get something? Usually, money, sex and power, classic stuff, right? For me, it's not about that at all. It's about a spiritual developmental process. We are in Helios doing something different. We're training priests, priestesses of the ancient mysteries. Not the fluffy bunny priestess stuff you see in Glastonbury, but serious stuff, right? With all due respect to my friends in Glastonbury, who probably would hate you saying that. But that's different. This is training priests and priestesses in the ancient ways that the Egyptians would have done, or the Greeks would have done, or the Atlanteans before then. And that's different. And it's a process of spiritual development. The magic it happens, and it's a byproduct of that, but it's not the be-all and end-all. I think that's really important to say. And people will be drawn to different traditions because they, I think, have past life connections to those. So the Egyptian stuff is cool, or the Celtic stuff is cool, or the American Indian stuff is interesting, or even the Nordic gods and goddesses, which is not my bag. That's not what I'm drawn to, because I think I probably have lots of past lives in Egypt, so that's where my connection is.
Yeah. Have you done any trips or tours of taking groups?
No, actually, no, not yet. It's on the plan at the moment. I have been to Egypt many times, and I've been on organised tours by other people, but I've not run one myself. I'd love to, actually. Yeah, but not yet.
Yeah, I know it's on my to-do list at some point. But, with Egypt and the pyramids, there's a lot of history about it was built with slaves and ropes and wheels and all sorts of stuff. But there's also a lot of theory that it was built on sound. So would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say from my personal experience of spending a night in the Great Pyramid as well, I don't believe that the pyramids were built when they said they were, at least when Egyptologists said they were. I think they're way older than that, number one. Number two, they're not tombs. That's just nuts. There's no evidence of ever anyone being buried in those two in a pyramid. Certainly not in the pyramids in Giza Plateau. I personally believe the Great Pyramid is an initiation machine. And if you lie in a sarcophagus in the King's Chamber and follow the right protocols, you will have an amazing experience. So I think the pyramids were built earlier than Egyptologists would have us believe, and for a different purpose. Were they built by the Egyptians themselves? I'm not sure. I suspect by an earlier civilization. And I think it's interesting if you look at the development of ancient Egypt as a civilization, its highest cultural peak was in the Old Kingdom, and it was kind of downhill from then on. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because most civilizations start and grow to a peak and then die off again, right? So the fact that the peak of Egypt was at the oldest time, at the Old Kingdom, 2500 BC or whatever, is that suggests that Egypt came from somewhere else. It didn't just grow and evolve in its own right, which, there's a book called Egypt, Child of Atlantis, which proposes that. And to me, that makes a huge amount of sense. And therefore, the pyramids that the Egyptologists would tell us were precursors to the Giza Plateau. For example, the pyramid of Djoser, the Step Pyramid. Many people like Graham Hancock would suggest that they were actually after they came afterwards, where the Egyptians were trying to recreate something that they'd already got, and they didn't know how to do either. So the Great Pyramids, the pyramids on the Giza Plateau are sitting there, and the Egyptians said, how do we build something like that? And their attempts was, for example, the Step Pyramid of Djoser in Saqqara, where Egyptologists say, oh, well, the Step Pyramid was the precursor to the Great Pyramid. But I might suggest that actually it came afterwards, right? Because they were trying to replicate something they didn't know how to replicate. So I certainly am open-minded as to whether the pyramids were built by quote-unquote Egyptians, but I do think they're much older than we're told they are, and I also think they were built for a different purpose.
And do you think sound had a big part to play in this?
Yes, I do. And I think sound for many different reasons, and there are many people who've done remote hearing into how the pyramids were built and suggested that it was done with some kind of sound technology. A book written many years ago called Mind Trek by Joseph McGonigal. He was the husband of the daughter of Robert Monroe, who founded the Monroe Institute in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. And I actually studied there in the 1990s and met Joseph McGonigal. And he did remote hearing into how the pyramids were built and put that into one of his books. And he said it was all due to sound technology they were using to levitate the stones. And I would think that's a very credible possibility.
So,
hey, talking about sound, there's some music coming through. Have you got music going on in the background there, Andy?
Let me see if I can turn that off. It's not mine, but let me see if I can get rid of that for you.
It's just it's in the background there.
I can hear it now. I couldn't before.
Yeah.
That should be fixed now. That's all right.
Yeah,
sorry about that. So, what were we saying? Somebody posted a question, I noticed.
Oh, yeah, there was a couple of questions come up, please, Jeffrey, if you could put them up again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that one. I thought that was quite an interesting question. How do I answer that? The short answer is yes, and it's a complicated answer to that question. Second death ritual. So what do you mean by that? Right? All the magical traditions, all the ancient spiritual traditions have this concept of you dying before you die so that you can experience that process, understand what comes next, and therefore navigate the afterworld once you actually do physically die. Even the Masons have that in the Masonic tradition, and I'm not a Mason, by the way, never have been, but they do. And the Egyptians do as well, and did. That's outlined quite well in a good book called Initiation of the Great Pyramid by Elaine Cheney, by the way. Great book. So, yes, this is your answer, and it's a much more complicated answer to that. Let me explain. There are different processes and ways of doing that. So, for example, there's a book called The 12 Gates of Isis that a guy did that whole process. And the Egyptian model was based on something called the 12 Hours of the Duat. And the 12 Hours of the Duat, if you have seen the Egyptian Book of the Dead, is essentially 12 hours of the night where Ra in his sunboat traverses the underworld before the sun rises again the following morning. That's a metaphor for all kinds of really interesting things. And those 12 hours are mapped out in the Egyptian Book of the Dead with spells to get you through each of the 12 gates through that 12-hour period as Ra traverses the underworld. It's a metaphor for a whole process of personal spiritual development and rebirth, essentially. Hence the death and the rebirth piece. Actually, I'm writing the second degree training for Helios right now, and it is based on exactly that model. So it is based on taking our first degree initiates who've studied with us for 2 or 3 years and complete their first degree program to do a 2-year program where they literally follow each of those 12 hours of the duat 1 month at a time working with the processes in each of those 12 hours, which is a process of spiritual development. And at the end of that process, there is the ritual, which the Egyptians would have called the raising of the priest king. And the raising of the priest king ritual is the death and rebirth ritual. That is not something that you can just throw somebody off the street into. Not if you wanted them to come out as a whole person again and not completely destroyed. You absolutely have to prepare for that in many, many, many different ways. We actually, so for example, we're so particular about it that we have our students complete a master practitioner in neurolinguistic programming as part of the second degree training. Not practitioner, that's the first one, master practitioner, because we really want them to have got their shit sorted out, to put it crudely, before we would put people through that process, right? Because we have to be responsible and we have to make sure that people are properly prepared. So the short answer is yes, but it's a more complicated thing than that.
But it makes total sense in what you're saying. So yeah, I can understand that process, like you say. Okay, right. So Carol says, how can we establish a good connection with higher guides rather than the fluffier kind?
I'm going to get into trouble for saying something I said now. That's a good question. The purpose of, so here's the thing, right? If you were to look at people who teach, I'm not criticizing anyone by naming names in this context, so don't get me wrong, but if you look at, say, the Golden Dawn system of magic and the way the Golden Dawn would teach that amazing system, by the way, or the Servants of the Light and the way they taught when Ernest Butler founded the SOL back in 1970s, there's one purpose that is not clearly stated in their training, and it is essentially, to use the Golden Dawn terminology, have you developed a connection with your holy guardian angel? Now, that's not a phrase that I like or I'm comfortable with because I'm not into all that Christian stuff, but it is a model for holy guardian angel. Could be your higher self, it could be your higher counsel or guides, it doesn't matter. The purpose of the training is to open you up to that connection. And that takes time, it takes dedication, and it takes practice. And there's no shortcut. It's like saying you don't get fit by watching a DVD. You get fit by going to the gym and doing the work, right? So in answer to Carol's question, it's disciplined meditation, and not just any old meditation, but meditation that's designed specifically to open you up to inner plane contacts, to use the Deal Fortune 19th century phrase, right? So if you're meditating on, if you're working with the Tree of Life, for example, doing the middle pillar exercise every day, meditating on Malkut and Yesod and Netzach and Hod, and working up the Tree of Life. You are working, when you do that, with specific energies on the levels of the Tree of Life that will, by working with them, start to open you up and shift your awareness to a different level. What then happens is those guides come to you, not the other way around, right? And they will make themselves known to you when you're at a place where you are able to connect with them. And it takes time, effort, dedication to do that. That's the only answer I could give, I'm afraid.
So for somebody in answer to that question, would you recommend finding a Tree of Life meditation? And what would you recommend? So working with the Tree of Life, looking at Israel Regardie's book, The Art of True Healing, for example, as a very first step, which is a really good book, very simple, thin little PDF you can get online. It's a good starting point. So if you're interested in that purpose, that process, working with the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, with the spheres on the Tree of Life, the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, let's explain what we mean by this. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So the Kabbalistic magical tradition comes out of the Jewish tradition, and it is a tradition that is primarily archangelic. So it works with the archangels, not just Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, but many others. And that tree of life Kabbalistic system of development was taken by the scholars of the Renaissance period in Italy, so Marsilio Ficino, for example, in Florence under Cosimo de' Medici. And they took that Jewish Kabbalistic model and quote-unquote westernized it. And that's what became the Hermetic tradition. And called Hermetic because some of the material comes from the so-called Corpus Hermeticum, which Marsilio Ficino translated into Latin from Greek, and supposedly the works of Hermes, and that's where that comes from. So the model of the Kabbalistic tree of life that we work with today in the West, which isn't how rabbis would necessarily teach it in Israel, is a westernized version of the tree of life model. And people like Israel Regardie, or even Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki in her book The Shining Paths, which is a good book for this, or Dion Fortune in her book The Mystical Qabalah, those are really good start points. If I was to recommend people working with the Tree of Life for that perspective, there's either Naomi Azanich's book, The Aquarian Qabalah, which is very good, Dion Fortune's classic, The Mystical Qabalah. There is Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki's book, it's completely slipped my mind now, let's look back to it. It's completely gone. I should know, I know it very well. And Israel Regardie's books, The Art of True Healing, The Shining Paths, Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki, The Shining Paths. Those would be good start points.
Well, okay. So regarding Helios School, how long is the training, and what are you looking for when a person says, I would like to follow that pathway and that training?
Well, if you go to the Helios website today, you'll see that we're in the middle of restructuring the content, which will be finished in the next couple of months. And the reason for that restructuring is, after 10 years of delivering our training to students, I've decided to take a different approach. The traditional way of teaching is you work every day, you meditate 6 days out of 7, you write all your experiences up in a diary, a supervisor reads all of them and gives you feedback on it. And after 3 years, you may have done enough that you qualify to be a first degree initiate, to be initiated first degree. To me, that's a model that doesn't any longer apply in the modern age. People don't have the time to do it that way. They probably don't have the attention span, unfortunately. So we have to look at it differently. So I've taken our first degree material, which is a 3-year program, and turned it into, well, it's not quite finished yet, but it will be very soon, into 5 standalone courses. And those standalone courses have a workbook, and you work through the workbook, and that's what you do in your own time, taking as long as you want to do it. It's a very different approach, and one that some of the traditional magical teachers are throwing their hands up in horror at. But it's a much more flexible way of teaching people the first degree program. So we have a course called The Foundations of Magic. We have a course on tarot alchemy. We have a course called Accelerating Your Personal Evolution, which is all on the mental and emotional developmental stuff. And we have an advanced course called Advanced Kabbalistic Magic. And those are standalone courses that people work through. And once they've completed those courses, they can apply to Helios to be considered to be initiated to the first degree. So it's a different approach, more flexible, and the second degree is different. The second degree requires a whole different level of commitment, but that's a different story. At that point, people are in a different place. So we've structured it so that people can can, for example, do the Foundations of Magic, which is a 3-month program, and if that's all they want to do and that's what they've got, great, happy days. They've learned what they wanted to learn, right? If they do that and they go, hey, you know what, I want to learn a bit more, I'm going to go and do tarot alchemy, they'll go do that. There's no obligation, there's no pressure, and there's no requirement of people. We know people are busy, we know they have crazy lives. How do they fit this into the context of 21st century living?
Because that is the key now. I mean, the energies are speeding up so fast and changing so fast. It's like, you know, the hours in a day are like, probably we've lost about 8 hours in a day now. You know, we're all chasing our tails, it seems, and you know you really got to make that space to be quiet and to be still. Where am I going with this? So obviously that's the key to anything really now, is at this moment in time, is to be, you know, go within and find that still space to move forward.
Yes, that's true. And it does take time. And, you know, I was saying to my boss this morning, because we're putting a program together for the startup company I'm working for, and we were discussing exactly this issue. And we said, right, when people start doing this kind of thing, they might only have 5 minutes a day. Well, that's fine. But probably if you get hooked on the process, you end up meditating for an hour a day, right? But that becomes a choice that you make time for, because it's a priority for you after experience, not from day one. If we said to people on day one, right, got to spend 45 minutes a day doing a meditation, they'd be running for the hills because they just can't fit that into their day, right? So we have to recognise that it's a different world now, and it does take dedication and practice. But there are different ways of enabling people to find their entry into that. I guess we could put it that way.
Because like once you've found that space, then you're happy to sit in that space, aren't you? You know.
Yes. But you know, I mean, when I was learning this stuff, I had 2 kids who were 3 and 5 and running around, and I actually had a temple in my garden, and my 4-year-old daughter would be banging on the door, and Dad, where are you? And so I'm trying to do my meditation. That happens, right? That's life. We all have that experience, right? So how do we deal with that? Because that's part of what we have to learn to do in the modern age.
A couple of things
Yeah.
there. In the Findhorn community, Elaine Caddy with her kids, she would go off to the public conveniences at midnight and sit there and get all her information and knowledge to write her aspects of what they had to do for the community. Many years ago I was in Cairo, and the fellow I was staying with, of course his name's Mohammed, he said, would you like to come to prayer? And I said, well, that's very kind of you. But it didn't have to go into a mosque. It was the fact that in his house he had a room with the map facing Mecca. And I said, what's the go with the prayer? And he said, well, you get called to prayer 7 times during the day. But he said, most importantly, you don't have to go 7 times, but you have to understand 7 times in a day we stop and we put ourselves in a place of higher thoughts for our fellow man and the way we live our lives. And I said, well, I take that on board. That's a really honourable position. And then if we look at the meditation processes, you know for a fact that you can go into meditation and you can be away for some time. And then when you come back, it's only 5 minutes, but you've gone into a deep state of samadhi and boom, you get that space. And then you have a look at the guy, the Silver, with the Silver method, who was the Mexican who was working in the American military and communications. And his story goes on about how he was reading to his children who were on the bed, on the floor, and he thought they were asleep. And they turned around and said, Dad, we listened to everything you said. And they repeated verbatim what he had said. And then that's when he did his electronic testing and realized that they'd jumped into a theta state where they were able to absorb all that knowledge. So there's a lot of aspects in life where you can actually do that. And in the Western world, is one of the biggest pastimes on this planet is going fishing, and quite a meditative state.
Yeah, not my bag, but yes.
Anyway,
Right,
I just wanted to. I just wanted to give some examples of how to get a message across. I mean, some people would say that you could take a book and you place it under your pillow at night, and you actually moved into the energy field. I mean, there's young kids who we had the lady, the UFO lady, Mary Rodwell, and she talked about how the kids. Yeah, Mary Rodwell, and so when she works with children, the children come on. I'll just move this into that space. You would give them. It could be a pamphlet, a book, a photo, and they knew immediately what was going on because they would read, not the actual stuff that's on the documents in their hand. They would read the energy of the person who wrote it or drew the picture, and they would move into the energy field to know that was truth or it wasn't false. And so there's a lot of those young kids there, or old souls who have come in child form, who can lead the way in showing that there's knowledge there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Just saying. We do have a question that's come up from Andrew Feasy here.
That's an interesting question. So, if I'm being brutally honest, I would say I don't know. I think that there is a significant amount of evidence to suggest that the character did live. I don't believe a shred of what we're told by the Catholic Church about that, by the way, at all. And I think that if he did live, which he probably did, excuse the phrase, but he'd be turning in his grave at what he saw was being done in his name. And there is significant evidence to show that he was in Egypt and in India, for that matter. So I think, sadly, that what's come out of that tradition is largely been used to dominate, manipulate, control people through fear and guilt and all kinds of things, which is highly unfortunate. But do I think he lived, and do I think he was a spiritual teacher or practitioner of his own? Then I think, on balance, yes, probably. I think that's true. He did, and I suspect he probably was a member of the Essene community, as you see detailed in the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example.
So I could throw a little line out there and say Russell Brand, another example of Mr. Christ. Yeah.
That's an interesting.
I'm just saying, anyone who goes against the narrative, isn't it? Yeah.
Very much so.
Absolutely. I mean, that reminds me of a story, which is a true story, by the way. I'm just thinking how much time we've got left to tell you the story, but it's a frightening story of modern age. 20 years ago, I was, more than 20 years ago now, for a large part of my younger life, I was involved in the Scouts, and I held some senior positions in the Scouts. And I'd given that up when I got married and had kids. My kids were coming to an age where they were old enough to become Cub Scouts and Scouts themselves. And my wife at the time said, why don't you set up a Scout group in our local village in Essex, where we lived in the UK? And so we did. And to cut a long story short, I was interviewed for the job of Group Scout Leader to set up this group. And we'd already set it up. So they had to decide whether I was a fit and proper person to hold a Scout Leader's warrant. And bear in mind that I'd been a Scout Leader before for many, many years and held some quite high positions in the Scout movement. I thought this was pretty much of a formality. One of the questions on the form to fill in for being a Scout Leader was, what religion are you? And I thought, here's an interesting one. So I put Kabbalist on the form. Right? Well, you can imagine that wasn't what they expected. And I went in for my interview, and the very first question that this interviewer said to me across the table was, "Do you believe in the resurrection?" And I thought, what's this got to do with me being a scout leader? Well, to cut a long story short, they basically said I wasn't a fit and proper person to be a scout leader because I wasn't, a good little Christian who that's what we were looking for. And there was a big hoo-ha about it. And ultimately, they did give me my warrant as a leader. And I actually, again, became pretty senior in the scout movement in the east of England at that point. And I remember going to an event and another woman scout leader walking up to me, and she looked at me and she said, "We used to burn people like you at the stake 300 years ago, and if I had my way, we'd do it again." And I thought, are those the kind of people that I want to be around in this movie? True story, right? And I was shocked, completely shocked, right? Because this wasn't about how spiritual you were or how developed you were or whatever. It was about, if you have a different set of beliefs to me, well, we're going to do something bad. And I'm thinking, I'm pleased I don't live in that world now. That's scary, right? Very scary.
There's still a lot.
Wars have been done on gods, isn't it? My God's better than your God, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, I'm trying to think. That was 2003. 2003, I think that happened. 20 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, Carol's her daughters were thrown out of brownies because not sent them to church on Sundays. Yeah, that would be right.
But for me, I don't mind if people, whatever spiritual development process people want to do, it's totally fine by me. That's totally okay. I think if I'm not being judgmental about that at all. I have a very good friend whose sister is terminally ill and a devout Christian, and that faith is helping her get through that very difficult time, and that's brilliant that that's the case. So I'm not criticising that at all. I think the most important thing is that we encourage people to find some form of mental, emotional, spiritual development, whatever that might be, because that's how we're going to make a better place to live in and a better planet if we could do that.
And it's like, you're people getting angry about what's going on in Russia or Utopia or all these different places and getting really angry and fired up, but they're not coming from that place within, because obviously if they deal with a lot of the anger and rage that's going on around them, it's bringing up all their stuck stuff, that they're still carrying that they've not dealt with.
And that's the key thing. They have to deal with it. Well, they don't have to, but that's the key thing that makes the difference, right? What limits most people's spiritual development is they're not dealing with their unresolved stuff. Negative emotions from the past, self-limiting beliefs, past traumas that they keep carrying around with them, kind of emotional baggage that they carry over their shoulder. That's the key. If they can't let that go. And what I love about neurolinguistic programming, about NLP, is it has very pragmatic and effective tools to allow you to do that. Right? No drama, just let that stuff go and move on. Right? Because ultimately, correct me if I'm wrong, but creating a magical life is about people having an amazing life with people they love around them and the abundance they want in their life, to have a comfortable life, and whatever that means for them. It's not up to us to judge what that is for another person. But if we can provide people with the tools to enable them to have that kind of life, then we have an obligation to be able to do that and teach people that, I think.
Yeah, so what?
I was going to say, it seems to me your school really is teaching people how to use the word imagineering as a phrase where because I see that you had an engineering background, so there's structure regarding engineering, but as Einstein said, that's the power of imagination. So if you can imagine it, then you can bring it into engineering, you can then actually manifest it. So all these things that we're seeing manifest in the physical realm today has actually come from a place of imagination, or the fact that it's already written. It's just that we have to raise that vibration. and go from a 386 SX computer to a Pentium, 7 or whatever, and raise our consciousness. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, totally. In fact, I think Theo fortunately said in her book, The Training and Work of the Initiate, imagination is the arse that carries the can't remember the phrase was. Imagination is the arse that carries the magic. In other words, imagination is the key enabler of all magical practice. Imagination is the arse that carries the ark. That's what she said, and that's true, because all manifestation comes from an idea, a concept that we create in the non-physical realm and bring into physical reality. How we do that, how effective we are at doing that, is really the key to learning magic, right? And the problem is, just as we finish at 4 minutes to 2, my time, that most people focus on what they don't want, not on what they do want. So consequently, they end up creating all the things in life they don't want. 9 times out of 10, I ask someone what do they want, and they'll tell me the things they don't want. I don't want to be poor. I don't want to be on my own. I don't want to be lonely. And I'm like, hang on a minute, what do you want? Right?
Yeah, start off with the positive note.
Okay, so if you're coming into the Imagineering and
image in.
Well, okay. I mean, we see that in life where people will go and manifest car parks, But in business, they sit down and they'll set a business plan for the year and structure up, this is the goals, this is our return on investment. In other words, they give themselves a floor and they also give them a ceiling as to what they can achieve. And yet, if they step out of that paradigm, they have abundance. But in terms of structure and going through the financial plans or say, listen, I'm going to list this on the stock exchange, or I have to show anecdotal evidence that this is what we're going to manifest in terms of income, this is our product. You see where I'm coming from? It's really a great restriction in terms of what abundance is available to them.
And the other thing that's also, for me, the absolute key is that, there was a really good DVD produced a number of years ago now called The Science Behind the Secret, with Michael Beckwith and Lord Marlowe Duquette and a few others. And it was talking about Rhonda Byrne's book, The Secret. Great book, great movie. I love both of them. But there's a key element missing from that process in the book, The Secret, or in the movie. And the key element that is the secret behind the secret is you have to clear your stuff out first. You have to clear your shit out of the past, excuse the French. And if you don't, it doesn't matter how many goals you put in the future. Your own limitations are going to prevent you from getting them. So if we're teaching goal setting and the secret of creating the future process in neurolinguistic programming in NLP, we don't teach it until we've used the clearing processes to clear out all the negative emotions from the past, all the self-limiting beliefs about whether you're worth it or not, whether you can have the things that you want, whether it's okay to have those things. Because only when you've cleared all that stuff out can you then truly be able to set the things in the future you want to manifest and have them come back and have them come true.
Well, you ever look at the planet, it's almost a school, and the same play continues to evolve. It's just a different stage set with different tools, but essentially it's the same game being repeated. How do we break the intelligence that's been set in place that restricts humanity to this level of, as Lord Machiavelli stated, if you don't have an enemy, create one, and that's what we see continually. So how do we go consciously? Do you go to the concept of where there's 2 or 3 gathered, get into a theta state, move into that energy that was created by Lord Machiavelli, and then transmute it? Is that what you do? I mean, is that part of your teachings? Have you go into the actual image of the repetition and then go back to it and get the eraser and erase it out and create something new? Is that how you go through the disposal of previous cycles of the same?
So Let's unpack that, because there's a lot in that statement. So first of all, for one of the first things you said, for me, it's really clear that there's a really fundamental, simple thing you have to do. It's not easy, but simple, which is get rid of fear. And clearing fear from people, from their past and from their future, and living in a state of fear, which a lot of people do. I'm not judging that, by the way, it just is what it is as I think, fundamental to that process of what you just described. Because fear will hold people into a very low vibration, and it stops people from really imagining and creating things in the future. So how you do that, there's a number of different ways of doing it. I would always use the timeline clearing processes in NLP to do that with, but there are others that you clear fear and anger and other negative emotions. And only when you've done that can people be at a higher level of vibration to be able to create and make those things manifest. I think it's as simple as that. It's not necessarily easy, but it's simple. Without that, then I think nothing else is going to really work. We're just putting lipstick on a pig, to coin a phrase.
So can I say to you, a good friend of ours on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, she always says, she always asks best possible outcome for everyone concerned. I noticed the other day, someone came to me and said, Jeff, what would love do? And I thought, it's pretty simple. What would love do? Yeah. And then you step back and ask, and then just wait for the answer to manifest.
But all of that presupposes certain things. Right? So it presupposes that you believe that that's true, right? It presupposes that you're in a place where you're willing to accept that and trust. And most people aren't. Not criticizing, but they're not. Because there is too much in that block people from being allowing that to happen. That's what I said about it being simple but not being easy. So until we can provide people with the tools, which we can, to clear that stuff, you know, you can sit in the chair and visualize all you like, but you know, it's not going to happen, because there's too many things that block us. And when we start to release those, true magic happens.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, you know, NLP is one, and there's EFT and theta, and you know, there's all sorts of different things that people can try, you know, to help clear their stuff and move on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a trained theta healer. I've done advanced theta healing. I studied that for quite a long time, and it's a great process. But my go-to is always going to be NLP.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm very aware that you've got a very busy schedule and you've fitted us in. So thank you so much for taking the time out today and sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. It's been amazing. You're
very welcome. I apologise for the network issues earlier on. That was unfortunate.
You have to talk to the Emir, mate.
This is true. Yes.
All right, Andy. Well, thank you once again, and thank you everybody.
Thank you.
Tuning in this week, and same time next week.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, radio. Okay, we'll change that so everybody can see that.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah.